Hello, everyone. My name is Liz Duvall. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm at the University of Kansas, studying higher education administration, as well as working within housing and residence life.
So I use she, her pronouns as well, and I also work in housing in residential engagement and am a student in the higher ed admin program.
So, throughout this presentation, we will be going over the overview of the case study, as well as legal, theoretical, and ethical frameworks, our course of action. We found three main issues, and those are student activism and free expression, support for impacted students, and the impact of orientation activities and institutional image. So, we also wanted to talk about some considerations that we had when it came to these situations, as well as how could we address those. And then we'll just conclude with a couple of other things. So, some context over Case Study University is it is a public four-year college in Caseville, which is a suburb of Metro City, which is in the western of United States. Um, the campus organization, Sumos Unidos, has submitted a request to protest on July 1st at the Freedom of Expression Zone. On July 1st, the same day as the protest and an orientation day with over 500 prospective students and their families, there's a new state law that's going to take place that creates a requirement that state colleges and universities are to eliminate any offices, programs, and practices that exclude individual identities and due to their identities. Specifically with Case Study University, there were two major cultural centers that would be impacted and shut down when this takes place, which is the Hispanic Student Center as well as the Black Student Center. We also just wanted to highlight the significance of this protest and what it means for the university. And it's important that we are highlighting our student voices and advocacy for identity inclusivity, and that this protest has the potential to raise awareness and influence campus policies.
So it's really important to look into the student demographics of this. So first of all, we have about 68% full-time students and 32% part-time. Our racial demographic, it's primarily a Hispanic and Latino serving school. So we have about 76% Hispanic students, 1% Native American, 20% white, 2% African American, and 2% Asian American. It's important to note that when there's a 25% or higher, when 25% or higher of the student population is Hispanic, it becomes a Hispanic serving institution. So we can see that that's a pretty large number there. Graph 3 shows our in-state and out-of-state students as well as international. As you can see here too, the in-state population is pretty high at 87%, which means that this is just as much a local issue as it is a university issue. Going back to like specific students within the case, we are going to look into Jose, Susie, and Greg. Jose is the president of Somos Unidos, as well as involved in many roles on campus. Susie is a student orientation leader and vice president of membership for the Somos Unidos organization. So it's important to acknowledge those two roles and the kind of split she may be feeling during this. And then Greg, he's also a student and orientation leader as well. So looking into the legal frameworks, we know that protests should and will happen on college campuses. Students are learning how to express their voice with new viewpoints in mind. The access to faculty and staff, as well as quality academic resources, make college campuses a safe and comfortable environment to do these kinds of things.
One area that we wanted to talk about and address was the ACPA and NASPA competencies, which are intended to define professional knowledge, skills, and attitude expected of student affairs professionals, regardless of the area that they are in the university. We found that the law, policy, and governance professional competency directly includes knowledge and skills related to policy development used in various contexts, application of legal constructs, compliance and policy issues, as well as the impact on one's professional practice.
So we know that the First Amendment protects rights such as free speech, religion, assembly, press, and right to petition the government. The goal is to exercise this in a safe and effective manner. So the student affairs professionals at Case Study College should aim to uphold these ideals with the caveat that there are certain restrictions for safety purposes. Section 1724 of the First Amendment is the state action doctrine. And this states essentially that the First Amendment does not apply to private persons, but since state universities are funded by the state and are public research institutions, they're government bodies that must act in accordance with these stipulations. So employees are acting on behalf of the government, and any violation of these things are seen as government censorship.
So throughout this case, it's important as professionals to see students where they're at in this college experience. During this protest and closure of areas, students may feel like they're in crisis, and these set of events may prompt developmental changes within their education and personal growth. So as a professional, it's our job to align student development theories with where the students are at in their lives. So we pick two specifically that we would be talking to the professionals about and how they could also address that with the students as well. So Chickering and Ricer's seven vectors theory represents a series of developmental tasks, and these theories can range from simple to majorly complex situations that might define a path for a student. And it's important as professionals to prompt those vectors in a way that students will understand. And so it's important to focus on specifically the vectors of developing purpose as well as establishing identity out of the seven. Students like Jose are probably likely navigating issues of identity and community, fighting for their right to keep their center open, as well as just have those physical spaces as a student. Another student, Greg, that we mentioned earlier, is concerned about the safety and the campus environment when it comes to that orientation day. And so just explaining to them on what the purpose of the protest is, how these students are feeling, and how they're feeling, validating the feelings are of utmost concern. Finding their sense of self using Austin's theory of involvement was really important. It's critical for students to have involvement for their academic and personal growth. It helps them find who they are, what they're doing, and building that community within, especially during these challenging times, such as the protest. Jose and Susie were previously mentioned with being a part of Somos Unidos, and having that active engagement is important for them to continue on within their university and throughout their path. Greg, it's important for him to find balance between his orientation duties as well as what's happening within the protest during that day.
So, looking into the ethical frameworks, there are multiple ethical principles that student affairs professionals adhere to within their institutions and workspaces. So, we chose a few from the ACPA competencies that we believe are relevant and helpful to this case. So, first and foremost, we want to recognize the importance of this protest. While we can't encourage either side as an institution, the new state law has clearly affected our Latinx, Hispanic, and Black student groups. So this makes Section 3.3 of the ethical frameworks necessary, as it recognizes that these potential conflicts should be resolved with respect to all parties involved. Assisting students is a crucial piece of a career in student affairs. 4.1 and 4.5 are necessary as they help the institution create productive, ethical, and responsible citizens, as well as report to the appropriate authorities if things become violent in any capacity or start escalating in that direction.
So, throughout our course of action, we decided on the four E's, which are educate, encourage, explain, and evaluate. So, as we educate our students, we need to be educating ourselves as professionals. And throughout this situation, it's important to prompt students to not just take in information from professionals, such as the rights and limitations when it comes to the protest, but how they can do it for themselves and how they can actually take that information in. The second thing is to encourage. When students are not heard, they're going to feel isolated or inclined to possibly take more drastic measures. And all in all, it's important to validate our students' emotions and thoughts and specifically walk them through specific situations on what that could end up looking like.
So explaining our number three, this kind of goes hand in hand with educate, but we think it's maybe better applied to the parents and prospective students attending orientation. The goal is to inform them that the institution encourages their students to have a voice and use that voice when they feel they're being silenced. And then just explaining to your students as well that you want them to be active, kind, and culturally aware citizens. For our number 4 piece, evaluate. Evaluation is important to any area or department within student affairs. And it may be especially useful to Dr. Regina Wallace, who is the dean at CSU. She manages the freedom of expression policy, and she may find that the freedom of expression zone should be moved if things don't go as well. But if things do go really well, they may find that they want to find methods to continue fostering this safe space and environment. It's also going to be important to evaluate and check in with students after the fact and get a feel of their attitudes and feelings surrounding the entire experience. So for student activism and free expression, this kind of goes along with educate. Returning to our First Amendment here, we know that we cannot infringe on the free speech rights of our students. They are free to organize and protest the new state law that has affected their resource and safe spaces. So before orientation day, it may be helpful to send a mass email or text to parents and prospective students that gives information about the protest and its content. On the day of the protest, it should be acknowledged by Dr. Regina Wallace and the university's role in it explained. So conversations with parents may become important, discussing the values of free speech on campus and explaining what is within the students' rights. They should also mention that safety is a really big concern here and state that action will be taken, say if traffic becomes obstructed or immediate threats arise. For supporting impacted students, this is really important. It goes along with educate and encourage. We don't want to become so involved with the smooth operation of orientation that we lack on support for the students attending the protest. So we know our students are pretty passionate about this. We want to support them in that. So the first step would maybe be educating the students on their rights. We're teaching them about their freedoms and limitations, time, place, and manner regulations, where hate speech stops and fighting words begin, and restrictions on obscenity, defamation, and imminent and lawless action. So maybe, for example, if a staff member is willing to work with Jose and distribute material that teaches the students about their freedoms, this would maybe be more preventative, proactive work.
We as professionals have to keep in mind the important resources that students might need in this time of crisis. Throughout the case study, there were areas of concern, confusion, and heightened emotions. And so, one professional resource that George and Susie might be able to use is Dr. Ross Bearclay. Dr. Bearclay is the director of orientation for Case Study University and might seemingly have a rapport with the students who are orientation leaders. So, that might not be directly just Greg and Susie, but it might be them as a whole. It's also important that throughout the conversation, professionals might bring up the Learning Service Office as well as the Conduct and Community Standards Office. These are great resources for students to actually learn what the rights and limitations are as a student when they're protesting, which Ella mentioned earlier within that time, place, and manner, as well as what they can actually say or not say during a protest. And I believe that the most important to keep in mind is the toll that this event might be taking on the students. Providing mental health services and resources alongside conversations of the nature are extremely important for students to help continue to develop.
So, with impact on orientation activities and institutional image, this one will explain a little bit more. We've discussed that the protest will take place despite orientation occurring, and it could potentially affect the institutional image, but this isn't something that we can be involved in. So, we'll talk a little bit about that time, place, and manner. There are situational regulations. So, for example, if the time is during class time and the manner is done very loudly or with its obscene signs, threatening statements, and with intent to damage property, that would violate those time, place, and manner sections. Threat of danger, that kind of goes along with the threatening statements. Speech that involves threats towards individuals or groups is not protected. Unfortunately, worry around disruption is not a valid cause for stopping protests. This may be a situation where we encourage individuals who aren't comfortable to maybe with the protest to maybe just leave the scene if things aren't really getting violent. Um, Dr. Christina Perez, she's an assistant professor and advisor for Somos Unidos. Maybe beforehand, running a workshop on belonging in communities for families of new students might help them feel more comfortable in that setting as well to maybe speak their mind about the situation. So when we look at maintaining university image and neutrality, students are exercising their right to protest. We're assuming they're keeping within their free speech limitations. So the university cannot stop this for the simple sake of maintaining image. And again, Dr. Perez has been a favorite and can run this workshop. So looking into the pros and cons, one thing we do, or not pros and cons, we're going to start with being proactive. So we're starting by empowering our students to express their values and concerns as informed citizens. And that starts with the education and explaining piece. Holding information sessions beforehand that explains how to hold an effective protest is going to be really crucial with proactive work in this. And also having staff members on site during the protest to have neutral conversations with them helps them know that they're supported, while also, being monitored in a way.
Next, we kind of want to fall into the reflection aspect. It's important while we are being proactive with our students and making sure that this is a safe and comfortable campus environment. It's important to reflect on how the protest went. We mentioned with Dr. Wallace that this would be a good time to kind of talk about the freedom of expression policy, but specifically looking at the implications of the new state law and the closure of cultural centers. Are we making sure that we're still giving a physical space for our students to kind of have those identity centered areas, as well as intentionally just making time to address and make needs to corrections for the freedom of expression policy. It's important that we discuss if the policy is beneficial for our students, how can we make it more beneficial, and just kind of follow along with those lines as well. So, in conclusion, and as professionals, we want to encourage our students to become well-rounded individuals who understand their rights and civic duties. And so, overall, a college campus is the right place to foster this environment where students can continue to grow personally within their identities, as well as just becoming well-informed citizens. And here's our citations that we ended up using throughout our research as well as through our presentation.
And then here is our LinkedIn's and emails. If you'd like to connect with us, you can follow the QR code to the right.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much for taking the time to listen to our meeting, and we really hope you enjoyed.